Well, it was a journey, actually. It started about 15 years ago when I had an early midlife crisis. I won't tell you how old I am, so I'll just pretend it's an early midlife crisis. But I wasn't enjoying life very much, and a dear friend of mine said, well, why don't you go see this coach that I see? Maybe he can help you. And before I really would see the coach, we sat down and just had coffee just to get to know each other a little bit. And he asked me two key questions that would kind of change my life. One was, if money was an issue, what would you do? Where would you live? What would you do? And it's interesting. It's something we're asked as kids, what do you dream about being? But once you start working, we kind of forget about those dreams. Most of us do anyway. Lots of people still dream, but most of us don't. So I stopped dreaming as a kid. So I couldn't answer the question. I really didn't know. And that really bothered me. And then the next question he asked me is, Tom, what are you great at? I was like, well, no one's really ever asked me that. What am I great at? People ask me what I went to school for, what do you do for work, what's your experience? So I kind of described to him that I grew up in the restaurant business, and I love taking care of people and helping people, but I've been in technology for many years and very diverse experience. So I think, those together, I think I'm pretty good at that, and that's, why people hire me. He said, well, that might be true, but that's not what I'm looking for. And I couldn't answer him. So I said, I don't know. And that really bothered me. So I spent the next year really trying to figure out the answers to those questions. It took me a while. I went through a lot of assessments and a lot of coaching, a lot of things, been reading a lot of books and trying to really figure myself out that I never really had. In that first year, I was very fortunate. I was able to figure out, I think, what made me great. And again, people don't ask these questions. I started to look at the problem differently. I had a different perspective on it because of my own journey as an athlete. I realized for athletes and artists, we ask people, what their talent is. And we actually, at a young age, we groom them since they're young. We give them all kinds of mentoring and coaching and send them off their way in hopes they become professional this or that. But for everybody else, we don't look at talent. For everybody else, we say, get a good education so you can get a good job. And good luck. So I realized in the business world, we don't look at talent, that it matters. So one of the things I want to uncover is, if I don't have a talent in sports, in athletics, or the arts, is, do I have a talent that matters? Do I have a talent that business needs? And I figured out I do. And it's through the help of a coach, I figured out what I now call my top natural talent, and it's teaching. It's interesting because when I was a kid, people told me, Tom, you'd be a great teacher, but I never saw that myself. I didn't see what they saw. But there were other aspects of it that I realized it isn't just teaching, because I knew teaching in K through 12 wasn't the answer. That's not what I wanted to do. So along the way, I also figured out what people saw in me as a teacher, what my strengths were, and what made me a talented teacher. And I realized a number of things. One, that I was very empathetic, and not everyone has empathy. Well, as a teacher, that's an important thing probably to have. I was also very positive and optimistic. Well, depending on what you're teaching, you may not need those traits. But I also realized I was a big picture thinker, a strategic thinker, and a futuristic thinker. So I always thought about theory. I had a theoretical mind, but no one ever pointed that out to me. So I realized if I was teaching theory, but being empathetic and positive and optimistic, that made me a certain kind of teacher. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Now, I'm not the only talented teacher, but it makes me somewhat rare if I teach theory and I'm positive and optimistic and empathetic. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I kept learning more about myself. And one of the other things I learned was that the environment mattered for me. And I realized why I didn't like or didn't think I'd like teaching in school. In the traditional classroom, which is very structured. 8 to 3 or whatever the time is, Monday through Friday, very structured. I've always been very unstructured, and I would not do well in that environment. So I realized something else, that I'd always as a kid needed diverse people in my life. I played different sports so I could have different cliques of friends. And I needed diversity of place. I don't even like going to the same coffee shop every day. So for me, diversity was key. Diversity of people, diversity of place, diversity of time. So I realized traveling was critical to my success. As I finally figured that out, I wondered, how come the rest of us don't figure? How come it took me to 36 years old to figure that out? How come we don't figure this out sooner? What are our schools? We say every child is gifted, yet we don't take the time to help every child find their gift. Well, that's like one of humanity's greatest oversights. Why aren't we doing that? Instead, again, we may try and help the athletes and artists find their gift, but for everyone else, we say education is what matters most. Get a good education so you can get a good job. So what, no other child is gifted unless you're an athlete or an artist? So I realized that was a huge problem. And why I got left back, because I didn't care about what they were teaching. So I started to look at a lot of these problems, and I started to realize that a lot of us are in the wrong role, in the wrong career, because nobody helped us figure out what made us great. Nobody bothered to take the time to help us figure out what we're most curious about. Nobody helps us figure out where our purpose is. And I was about 5 years into this journey, and I often tell people I was flying back, from Sydney, Australia on a trip. I was 5 years in asking all these questions. And I went back to the question my old coach had asked me, if money was an issue, what would you do? I said, I'd be teaching theory, I'd be flying around the world, I'd do it for free. But then I asked myself the next important question, which is, but would you be teaching technology? And it only took me a second to say no. I was like, holy cow, I thought I had it all figured out, but then I was missing the fourth leg of the stool. But honestly, I didn't know, because all I knew was technology. I didn't know what I would teach. So I started to think about what I talk to friends about, whether I'm hiking or mountain biking or whatever, or if I'm having, conversation over coffee or beer or whatever, what do I talk about? If they're not asking me about technology, because that's my background, what do we talk about? And I realized it was around human behaviors, on sociology, philosophy. Ever since I was a kid, that's what I wondered about. And I thought, well, should I go back to school and learn to teach philosophy or sociology? And I was like, nah, I hated school. I don't want to go back to school. But also I realized it would be the wrong environment for me. So I'm like, well, what could I teach that I could still do the same thing? And then it hit me. I'm like, wait a minute. I just spent a significant part of my life just chasing down the answers to these problems that I encountered. And I think I found some answers that nobody else had shared with me. So I realized, wow, I'd love to teach this stuff. Not only would it be fun, because I really enjoy it, and I'm really curious about it, but also because I think I found answers to problems that I encountered and other people encounter. And then another epiphany hit me, and I think I finally realized what fulfillment is all about. Was that it was about working on something that you were challenged by in your life and along your journey, working on it, wondering about it, and then overcoming it, but not just overcoming it, gaining wisdom through that, and then being able to turn around and impact others through what you learn. And I realized that's really what everyone I've heard about that leads a fulfilling life, that's what they do. And since that flight home, I knew from that day forward what I needed to do, because it was a pain I struggled with. And there'd be nothing more rewarding than to teach this, to help other people with this, to help other people overcome this. And that's how I figured out that this is needed. So about 4 years ago, I sold my technology company, and I said I have to do this. I decided to take the risk that I had to be the example for my children. So as I started to talk to other people about what I should do with it, should I write a book and go out there on a book tour and talk about it? Because that's what I wanted to do, is get out and talk about it, about how do I do that? And the more friends I talked to about it, they said, Tom, you're crazy. This is a huge idea. You can't just tell people they have to do it. You have to give them the solution. And you said there's no solution out there. There's no one solution out there. No one's doing it. But you say you know how, so why don't you do it? Finally, about 2 years ago, decided to do it. But what I did this time, which I did different, is that I knew what my role was for this company. It wasn't to be the CEO, and that's where a lot of people make the mistake when they have an idea, because they tell us that we're supposed to move up the corporate ladder. So when we have an idea, it's our company, and people get the idea that that means they're supposed to lead it. But what if you're not a natural-born leader? And I'm not. I want to teach, and that's what I'm best at. So what I did is I found a business partner that's a great leader, and I asked him to be the CEO, and somebody that's a great CFO. He's another partner. I wanted to surround myself with incredibly talented people that also wanted to make this impact with the world, but I needed to make sure I was in the right role. This is just another step in the journey that's really just beginning.